Good morning. I'm privileged to be here today and share of the wonderful love and grace and the mercy of God. Share about each man's journey. My journey I'm talking about has been an incredible journey. And no man does know what a day holds. We can think we're going to do this tomorrow, but when we're led by the Spirit of God, and the sons of God are led by the Spirit of God, and it's just an amazing kind of lifestyle. And in 91, we were in Tutwiler prison in Alabama. Ruth Ann had just been born. And we took her inside the prison, and I preached, and Angie was to sing. Well, I think she was 3 or 4 days old, was Ruthie, but she was very young anyway. Angie passed the baby to one of the women, and the next thing, all the women, the whole crowd of women were in the auditorium that morning, and they passed that baby round to every single one of them. I don't know how Angie sang the song, but when we got outside, Rachel, who was 11 at the time, she said, "Dad, what are we going to do about their children?" And it's amazing that, she's 11 years of age, and she was looking at these women who in their own hearts and minds were imagining Ruthie Ann to be their baby. And Rachel suddenly understood that these women had children and they would not see for a while and things like that. Well, I just looked at her and said, "Well, we're really busy right now, baby. Just leave it, Then a few years later, while I'm in Russia, Angie called me and she'd said, "Pete, Howard, who was an ex-prisoner, an offender who was very close to me at the time, and brought 2 biracial children to our home and in Holtville. And so he'd asked her, would she care for them? The mother was in prison. And the grandfather, she was white, and obviously the father was black, but the grandfather didn't want the children, or he couldn't keep the children. And so he'd asked Angie, brought him to Angie and asked she called me while I was in Russia. And the story goes, she called me and she said, "Pete told me what I've just told you guys." And then I said, "Well, wait till I get home." But when I got home after that journey, these 2 little boys, Jonathan and Jamie, were there. And they were playing on the carpet. And after a little while, the older one, Jonathan, looked at me and he said, "Uncle Pete." And I knew that he'd set me up for that. Well, I did feel that in my heart. But anyway, I said, "Okay, let's do it." And I knew what they were aiming for. I knew what God had put on their hearts. And I said, "Let's just go for it." I said, "But I'm involved in these prisons, and I can't let anything stop me taking the gospel to the prisons. If you want to do it, you guys can go ahead and be led by God and build a children's home or do the children's home." And that was it. So, but just at that time, we had ex-inmates staying with us at the time, and there's about to become a change in that. And the main reason the change with the prisoners, I was away all the time, and I had, up to this time, I had 3 little kids, then I had Ruthie. And so it was hard on Angie, being alone with those men who were fantastic guys. But it was hard for her to just, to just be at home with their babies and these men. And so we were about to change things, and we let it just run its own course. And after 3 guys had left that were on real good terms, then we could start building that children's home. And she began it block by block, just praying and believing God and starting that kid's home. Well, during that time, I went to Brother Clenden's convention in Beaumont, the School of Christ convention, and it was excellent. But I met a guy there named Robert Mason, and Robert run a mission in Lima, Peru, and he'd heard much about what we'd done in Russia. And he said, "Dad, we're in a couple of prisons in Peru, and in Lima." He said, "Would you like to come and maybe think about starting a School of Christ?" And I said, "Let me think about it." Well, while I was in the prisons of Alabama, all them years, I'd watched men get saved, walk with God in them prisons, and then leave, and then within a short while they'll be back again. And I knew that there was a whole lack of teaching. So when the opportunity come for me to go to Russia and put the School of Christ in prisons, I jumped at the idea. And now the thought of going to South America, to Peru, not just to preach and have crusades on the yard, but to be able to, if possible, take the School of Christ and teach the guys and make men of God out of them. And so I said, I agreed to do that. So in June of that year, I guess that was 96. In 96, I went to Lima, Peru, not knowing anything about the country, not knowing anything about the people. There was Indians, all kinds of people. Knew nothing about that beautiful country. But Brother Mason had invited me. And so I met him there, and he took me to meet a general who was in charge of all the prisons. His name is General Nkantakari. And he worked very close with the president of the country at the time, who was Mr. Fujimori. And so he operated the prisons himself. He did a lot of things to General Nkantakari. But he was very graciously allowed me to come and see him through Brother Mason. And we talked. And in our conversation, I told him, about the prisons in Russia, the prisons in America, and how it helped, and how we put the School of Christ and we watched lives changed. And so he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to put a school in, not only preach, but I'd like to put a school in the prisons and teach the men. I had no idea where we were going to go, where he was going to take me. And he looked at me and he said, we have the worst prison in all of the world. And I kind of looked at him. He said, ABC had did a documentary and it showed that it was the roughest prison in all the world. And kind of had tongue in cheek, because I thought, nothing like them, can't be anything like them Russian prisons. And so the next day he arranged to take Brother Mason, myself, and some other workers out of the mission in Lima to the prisons and to Lorigancho. Well, just the town of Lorigancho itself is enough to make you think again. I got to that prison, and I promise you, those old walls, they were scary looking. And we went inside the main entrance, and I've never seen appalling filth like it in all my life. It was disgusting. It was filthy. There wasn't a window in the place, nothing. Everything was broken. There was 6,000 men in that place, built for 1,000 men. There was the toilets, the facilities were non-existent. The showers, they got a hose and they hosed themselves down. We've just walked around and seen, I really seen a guy crawling on the floor with just one leg, and his other leg was gashed, the other leg which was off just above the knee. It was bleeding, and he was showing me his knee, and because he was asking for pennies. And all around that place, there was men laying down, naked and half naked, the stench and the filth. It was just unbelievable. And we got into the middle of the yard, and the general looked at me and said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I'd like to just preach the gospel. Come in as soon as you want me to, and just preach, and perhaps set up that School of Christ. And he said, okay, I'll take you to a building. So he took us to another part of the prison where the building was separated from the rest of the prison. And it was, you think the other one side was rotten. This side, this building that he took us to had just no windows whatsoever. It had windows, but they were all broken out. And there was no water, nothing in it, just a building. And the bars on the outside of it, and it's just a mess. The whole thing was just, it's indescribable. It looked like something off one of them horror movies, and I'd never seen anything like it. If you'd told me about it, I'd have thought, oh yeah. But but the Bible says God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And he sees the world from his standpoint. He looks down and he sees everything. There's not a prisoner, there's not a filthy man, there's not a rotten man that he didn't come to save. And you look at that situation, a scary situation, and that general is looking at me and said, well, I've got this building, would you like to start there? And I said, yeah. No chairs, no nothing inside of it, no electricity running from it. And so I said, okay, I'd love to start. So he said, when would you like to come in? I said, well, we're here. We'll maybe come tomorrow. And he said, okay. So he got us permission to go, he granted us permission to go into Lorigancio. And just leaving that place, just walking out that day, I mean, it was just like something off another planet. And in my heart, instead of looking at all the mess, I'm looking at all the guys. They were, Indian, swarthy looking guys, most of them South American, dark skinned. And they were just hovering around everywhere. There was no order, no discipline, no nothing. The only food they got was a bowl of rice every day, and that which the wives would come in at the weekend and supply the needs. And the general explained all this to us. So I said, yes, we'll go in. I'd love to do it. And he agreed. And he said, well, you can come in tomorrow, get your pass to come in tomorrow. So that was the starting of Lima, Peru, and that's also the starting of Adullam House, as you know it today, at the children's home. So it's tomorrow morning. I'll share a little bit more, the Lord willing, if Lorigancio and the places that we visited for the next few. I was in Lorigancio 4 years in Peruvian prisons, and many great things happened. But we'll start with Lorigancio tomorrow. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.